Let's actually talk about David Friedman, the far right-wing bankruptcy lawyer tapped by Donald Trump, as you said, to be U.S. ambassador to Israel. He supports Israel's Jewish-only settlements in the occupied West Bank, says he doesn't think it would be illegal for Israel to annex the entire Palestinian territory, despite the fact, of course, it would be illegal under international law.
Annex. What a pleasant word for theft and lawlessness, isn't it? And drum roll, please.
He's actually Donald Trump's bankruptcy lawyer.
A bankruptcy attorney with no diplomatic experience, his nomination signals a sharp departure from decades of American policy on the country. He served as a campaign advisor to the president-elect on the Middle East and has set out hardline positions on Israeli-Palestinian relations.
The Trump administration will never pressure Israel into a two-state solution or any other solution that is against the wishes of the Israeli people.
Most notably, he said he would move the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, a potentially explosive move. Most foreign embassies are located in Tel Aviv, as most countries don't accept Jerusalem as the Israeli capital.
Friedman's far-right position spurring outrage among left-leaning Jewish organizations. Friedman advocates relocating the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and is a supporter of building new settlements in the West Bank. This summer, he compared members of J Street, a Jewish lobbyist organization who back a two-state solution to Jews who aided the Nazis during the Holocaust.
Allow me to share exactly what he wrote as an opinion piece for the Israeli news outlet Arutz Shiva, a place I get much of my info, by the way, but don't let them know that. So he wrote, "Are J Street supporters really as bad as Kapus? The answer actually is no. They are far worse than Kapus, Jews who turned in their fellow Jews in the Nazi death camps. The Kapus faced extraordinary cruelty, and who knows what any of us would have done under those circumstances to save a loved one. But J Street, they are just smug advocates of Israel's destruction delivered from the comfort of their secure American sofas. It's hard to imagine anyone worse." End quote. When asked about his comment on J Street at the Saban Forum, Friedman stood by his statements.
Rebecca Vilkomerson, Executive Director of Jewish Voice for Peace. Rebecca, I know that you're not super excited about this pick, number one, but tell me and tell our viewers why this is a big deal, moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Yeah, thanks so much. You know, this appointment really confirms our worst fears about the Trump administration's approach to Israel. What he's really doing with this appointment is empowering the furthest right elements of the Israeli government, far to the right, actually, of Prime Minister Netanyahu. And these policies you mentioned are really about annexation. It's about Israel, contrary to international law, contrary to decades of U.S. policy, taking over the occupied territories and ending the hopes for freedom and equality for Palestinians and for peace-loving Israelis.
But why is it a big deal to move the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, to our viewers who might not understand the region and what sort of consequences that may have?
Sure. I mean, for decades, the United States has kept its embassy in Tel Aviv, and that's been standard for all governments around the world. And that's because both Palestinians and Israelis see Jerusalem as their capital, and that's been a sticking point in negotiations for decades. And so this is really, like an attack on the aspirations of Palestinians for their freedom, and could potentially be a powder keg in the region.
There's outrage among more liberal Jewish organizations like your own, but this shouldn't necessarily come as a surprise. Take a listen to what Donald Trump said back in May about settlement construction.
I don't think there should be a pause. And Israel, I think, never was properly treated by our country. I mean, do you know what that is, how devastating that is?
He's saying that Israel was not properly treated by the United States.
I believe Friedman would agree with that, as he has accused the U.S. State Department of being anti-Semitic and anti-Israel for the past 70 years.
He advocated moving the embassy to Jerusalem during the campaign. Right. This is something that was on his agenda. It was part of his platform. We knew it was going to happen. So why come out and, sound the alarm now?
I mean, I think we all need to be sounding the alarm. These are really absurd positions. Israel already gets the largest aid package from the United States of any other country in the world. We don't need better relationships with Israel. What we need is a strong voice for Palestinian rights and for Israelis who are working hard for peace. I think this appointment is just going to be terrible for everyone. It's bad for Palestinians. It's bad for Israelis. It's bad for American Jews whose views are not represented by David Friedman. It's bad for Muslims who are being attacked by him, based on their race and ethnicity. It's just it's bad for U.S. policy.
And I'd just like to add, on December 14th, 2016, shortly after Trump called for a temporary Muslim immigration ban, Friedman expressed his support. Because, in a radical Zionist mind, only Muslims are ever terrorists.
Harris reported earlier this month that the Kushner Family Foundation had donated tens of thousands of dollars for projects to settle in the West Bank. Do you think that the Kushner family could potentially be behind this pick? And if so, what sort of consequences will that have?
Well, Donald Trump himself has said that he was hoping that Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, would be helping with approaches to peace in the region. And I think it's clear that both the Kushner family and David Friedman himself, who has been raising money for some very extreme settlements, they have very clear interests that are not about the interests of everybody in the region. They're specifically in favor of settlers, in favor of the farthest right of the Israeli public. And so this is not, this is not an even-handed approach to a solution. It's not going to be seen as people who can work with Palestinians to help achieve their freedom.
His role, given what is going on, between Israelis and Palestinians right now.
Well, there's three levels of concern. One is just the views that he espouses, which are to the far right of even the far right when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And a president has a right to appoint an ambassador who represents his views, as misguided as they may be. So that's problem one, is opposition to a two-state solution, support for settlements. Second problem is a complete lack of experience, diplomatic novice in one of the most sensitive spots in the globe.
Which is usually held by an experienced Foreign Service professional.
It is. And, again, ambassadors can be friends of the president and can be donors and supporters. So you can justify perhaps that as, as a second problem.
That's usually in places where they are doing a lot of socializing and hosting or business communications, not Israel.
Right, which sort of brings you to the third problem, which is the whole demeanor of the man. And to put someone who has no control over his mouth and no control over the way in which he refers to people he doesn't like or doesn't agree with is simply should not pass the test for the Senate of advice and consent. It should be a nomination that is rejected.
Now, Jared Kushner, of course, the very influential son-in-law of Donald Trump, has also been a supporter of some of these groups with David Friedman.
Right. David Friedman is the chair of an American Friends group of the most extreme settlement on the West Bank, a town called Beit El. And he's raised money, millions and millions of dollars over the year to support the institutions of that settlement. The founding families of the Friends group were the Friedman family and the Kushner family, and a couple of others who are among the more extreme American funders of these kinds of enterprises. So it's of no comfort to think that that Jared Kushner would be part of the mix in seeking a solution to this conflict.
Which the president-elect has said, that Jared Kushner might be one of his negotiators or a mediator.
He has said that, and the president-elect also, it turns out, has been a donor to this settlement through the American Friends Group, and that came out in his Trump Foundation tax returns from about 10 years ago. So there's grave concern for those of us who believe in a two-state solution, those who don't think that the settlement enterprise is furthering the cause of peace and lowering the temperatures. This nomination is of grave concern.
5 former ambassadors to Israel wrote to Congress asking them to seriously question Friedman's viability for the position, writing, quote, "We care deeply about Israel. Friedman has been active in supporting and financing the settler movement. He has said that he does not believe it would be illegal for Israel to annex the occupied West Bank. We believe him to be unqualified for the position."
Yep. So who does Fox bring in?
So we bring in former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Danny Ayalon, to talk about all of this. You saw those protests. I mean, you had both Palestinian flags being raised and then American Jews dancing in and blowing the shofar, which is a Jewish symbol. Certainly, protest letters, petitions, welcome to America. Are you concerned about David Friedman?
Not at all. I think he will be a great ambassador, an ambassador needs to have the ear of the president. And this is more important than anything else. Obviously, he has the trust of the president, and I think he can represent America very well.
Is David Friedman the man, considering he is extremely supportive of the contested settlements in East Jerusalem?
Friedman also owns properties in the Talbiah neighborhood of Jerusalem.
And of course, the West Bank. His father is one of the founders of one of them, Beit El.
His father, by the way, Morris S. Friedman, was a radical Zionist also, who was a rabbi at Temple Hillel, a conservative synagogue in North Woodmere, New York, and served as the head of the New York Board of Rabbis. David is clearly just another chip off the old block.
And so I'm just wondering, is he the guy who can bring the Palestinians and the Israelis together, or do you really think it might be Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law?
Well, one is entitled for his own convictions and beliefs, but I'm sure he's a professional enough to separate this and the policies he's going to represent and implement. I think he will do a great job.
Ambassador Danny Ayalon, former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. You've served your country brilliantly as well. Thank you so much.